I love talking about politics. I love talking to politicians, and I really am glad, extremely glad that the following guest is joining us here on Imagen News. He's the governor of the state of Puebla, Rafael Moreno Valle, and you've been in power for 1 year, Governor. How has it been? Welcome to the show.
Hi, Ana Maria. Thank you for this opportunity.
Tell us a little bit about your first year in power. I mean, you're a different type of governor. That's what I perceive.
Well, it's been exactly 1 year since I took office, and as you know, my election, which was on the 4th of July of 2010, was very peculiar because I was supported by an alliance of 4 different parties, the PRD, the PAN, the Nueva Alianza Party, and Convergencia, which is now Movimiento Ciudadano. I say it's very peculiar because now, out of the 4 parties that supported me, they're all in different political projects and supporting different candidates for the presidency.
You know, for foreigners who listen to the show, because we have a very important percentage of people who listen to Imagen News are people who are not from Mexico. You know, when they listen to this, I mean, they really kind of scratch their head and they basically tell me, you know, it is so hard to understand Mexican politics because you have the right making an alliance with the extreme left and the left making an alliance and fighting with the other parties of the left. You know what I mean? This could be extremely confusing. It's confusing for those of us who follow it every day, but it's extremely confusing for people who are looking from outside into Mexico. You know what I mean?
Absolutely, and it's something that had never happened before. And at the beginning, it was a very complicated negotiation because, as you can imagine, there are certain issues which you can never reach an agreement on, such as abortion. It's like if you try to reach an agreement between a pro-life group and a pro-choice group, it's impossible. There's many other things where you can reach agreements. Actually, what happens in the U.S., and you're seeing it right now in the primaries, you see the Republican candidates going towards the right because most of the voters in the primaries are more right-minded people.
Right.
And whereas the Democrats go towards the left right now, Obama doesn't have an opposition, but when you've seen Democratic primaries, the candidates tend to go to the left, and then when the general election comes through, they both go to the center, where you see all the independents and so on. So here, there are certain issues, obviously, which could not be negotiated. And what I decided to do was to take them out of the table. I said, look, abortion is not a government issue. It's a legislative issue. Therefore, since once we reach power, the legislatures are going to be aligned to their original parties, then they can decide that there. So there are certain issues that would have avoided an agreement. This would have been, there would have been deal breakers, so to speak. So essentially, we were able take those out of the table, like gay marriage, for instance, also. And then we focused on projects. I said, if we can envision what state we want, and if we look at where we are now, and in terms of population, in terms of the needs, in terms of the challenges that we're facing, we have to make a plan of where we are now and where we want to go.
Right.
We have to look at public policies that have worked, that have been successful, and the idea is as long as they're good for the development of the state, we will take them. So we started discussing projects and programs. For instance, in Mexico City, there's a program which is governed by PRD. There's a program that supports with 500 pesos. Well, I think there it's like 750 pesos. Here in Puebla, it's 500 pesos for
elders
people,
or
elder people.
Yeah. For seniors. The correct word would be seniors, yeah.
Senior citizens, yeah. So basically, that's a program that has been very successful. It's a direct transfer of money to people that are normally in the poverty level. So you can improve all the indicators that was successful. Another project that we took.
But I have to stop you right there, Governor. I mean, many would argue these types of programs would be considered very populist. I mean, you do provide a certain amount of help, but at the end of the day, it doesn't make a major difference in the quality of life of these senior citizens, because it does help, but it really doesn't help that much.
Well,
would be the argument.
Just a little. It's not a complete solution, but it is help, and that's something that they appreciate, and obviously their families appreciate, because most of these elder people, and we're talking about, especially here in the state of Puebla, we're giving these type of support to senior citizens that do not have a pension, and that they do not receive any other government programs. So they are very poor, so it helps them very much in terms of their basic needs, obviously.
But can you continue to do this in the long term?
Well,
I mean, that's the question.
Since this is a program that complements a federal program, we have a federal program here in Mexico called 70 y Más.
Right.
And that is giving 500 pesos a month to senior citizens in the rural areas. Actually, we just received news from the President of Mexico, Felipe Calderón, announcing that there will be an urban program for 70 y Más. For instance, in my state government, we don't give our program to people that already receive the federal program. So as the federal program grows, which is going to grow, our program will be reduced. And therefore, the state funds won't be compromised in the future. So that's not a project that is that expensive, but it's very socially very important. Another project we took, for instance, from the PRD was what they call in Mexico City Metrobus.
Yes.
It's a project that has been very good for public transportation.
It's very I agree with you. I think it's very successful, and it's very effective. It's very effective.
And Puebla is the 5th largest state in terms of population, and we have one of the largest metropolitan areas, and we don't have something like that. So that was part of our platform, and we are now building what is called Ruta. It's essentially the same project, Metrobus. Then we took, for instance, from the Nueva Alianza, we took a program where we are giving training to teachers. I'm convinced that in the 21st century, we need our children to learn how to speak English and learn how to use computers. However, many of the teachers were not trained and did not learn how to speak English or how to use computers.
Right.
Therefore, we are funding the largest training program anywhere in Mexico. We did in the first year more than the last 6 years of the past state government in terms of training teachers with learning English and new technologies.
We're talking to the Governor of Puebla, Rafael Moreno Valle. Governor, we've got to go to commercial break. Could you please stay on the line, and when we come back, we'll continue this conversation. And I want to ask you about what's going to happen with the former Governor of Puebla, Mario Marin, whether there's any ongoing investigations. I mean, there was a lot of questions about his administration, so I'd like to ask you that when we come back. Could you please stay on the line, Governor?
Yes, of course.
You all are listening to Imagen News. I'm María Salazar. Don't go away. I'll be right back.
You're listening to Imagen News with María Salazar.
On the line is the Governor of Puebla, of the state of Puebla, Rafael Moreno Valle, and you are celebrating your first year in office, sir. And before we went to commercial break, I asked you about your predecessor, Mario Marin. He was the governor for the PRI party. He was criticized in many ways, not only because of these recordings that came out. I'm sure most people remember the Gobernador Precioso recordings, but also because of the way he administered funds in his government. There was also been kind of this expectation that one way or the other that you would go after at least some of the people in his in Mario Marin's administration, or even go investigate the governor. Is anything going on? Is there anything that you would want to share with the audience?
Well, Ana Maria, when I took office, I was very clear in stating that nobody is above the law. And also, I mentioned that we would not engage in a witch hunt, but we would not cover up anything. So I can tell you now that we have recovered 27 properties that were illegally given to private people when they were public properties. So we have recovered those. That has been one of the areas where we have advanced. And also we have already put in jail, for instance, the former Secretary of Health.
Yeah.
And what is important here is also always to respect the rule of law. As you have seen sometimes, and I'm sure your audience has heard, that people have been accused of things in different state governments, new governors accusing former governors or former public servants of corruption and so on and so forth, but nothing ever happens, or sometimes even it's more frustrating because people get detained and then a few hours or a few days later
they're released.
And that has caused a lot of anger with the public, and I think that in order to avoid that, we have to be very sure that we have the elements to be able to withstand any type of scrutiny. And sometimes you can presume things, but it's having to prove them. As they have it in the U.S., for instance, it's beyond a reasonable doubt. You have to prove beyond a reasonable doubt.
But that's what's so frustrating, Governor, because it was very frustrating to see what was happening in Puebla, because even when these recordings came out, were made public, and it was quite scandalous. There was elections a year after, and the PRI within Puebla was reelected again. I mean, they won most of the municipalities. So it was just kind of the sense that you can really misbehave. The information can be made available, and this is also the case of Bejarano here in Mexico City, and other recordings that have been made public. You can really misbehave, and nothing happens. You know what I mean?
Absolutely, and what's even more frustrating is that even the Supreme Court analyzed the Mario Marin case and determined in a split vote that he was not guilty of any violations to human rights.
Right.
And obviously, to the people who heard the recordings, who saw what happened through the different newspapers and radio stations and TV stations, they're like, how could this happen? But the court obviously has to apply the law. So in that case, the argument was that the recordings were made illegally,
right,
and so they could not use them as proof against the former governor. For instance, in the case of the former Minister of Health, as we have been investigating every other case, we started reviewing what he had done in terms of acquisitions, in terms of construction, and so on and so forth, because sometimes they would pay for a medication 10 or 20 times the cost, and we thought it would be very easy to prove that. However, when we started looking at the documents, the former secretary, or former minister, delegated his responsibility to minor
public officials. Yeah.
So all of a sudden, you say, well, you can proceed, but you can't go against the boss. You can only go against, a director or a treasurer, or so on and so forth. So we have been going with every caution possible against the different public officials. We have obtained sentences in some of these cases, and also against the former Secretary of Health. When we were able to put a case together, it was because some citizens told us that he owned a bunch of properties.
And then you could investigate.
That was not in the document that we had at hand. Obviously, that was not in his statement of what were his what was his wealth, his net worth, and so on. So we had to look, and following this guidance from the citizens, we started finding that there were many properties in his name that had been acquired during his tenure as secretary, and that obviously he could not have purchased them with the
money
salary that he was receiving.
Governor, I have to unfortunately stop you right now. Believe it or not, we ran out of time.
Well,
so I have to ask you, please promise me you'll come back, because I do have a lot of questions. And one of the questions I have, and that's why I really do hope you'll come back, is why is Puebla so safe? I mean, you know, when you look around, many states, many of the neighbors of Mexico City are starting to have extreme problems with insecurity and organized crime. So I'm really curious to find out what you all are doing in Puebla.
Of course, I'll be happy to share that with your audience, and also I'll take this opportunity to invite all of you on the 5th of May, which is, as you know, the largest celebration that they have, not only for the Mexicans in the United States, but all of Latin America.
Of course.
Unfortunately, many people don't know what we're celebrating. When I used to live in the U.S., I used to work there, I went to school there, and I remember many times that people would ask me on the 5th of May if it was the Mexican independence or it was the Mexican Revolution, but actually we're celebrating the Battle of Puebla, where the Mexican army defeated the French army. So
you can say it. They kicked the French army in their ass.
Exactly.
It's okay to say that.
Put it very bluntly. And so we are celebrating 150 years from that historic date. We're going to have a lot of infrastructure projects that are going to be inaugurated for that festivity to commemorate the...
Come back, Governor. Promise me you'll come back.
Yes, of course.
Okay.
I'll be happy, and I'll give you more details of the biggest party that will be
Thank you, Governor.
In a long time.
Thank you, Governor. That was Governor Rafael Moreno Valle. We ran out of time. I'm María Salazar, and I sure hope you'll join us in our next edition of Imagen News.